on the matter of viewing statistics that come out from your quiz results, I have discovered that there is a need to clarify the meaning of some of the terminology. So, what I will do first is to give you just an introduction in case that you're not all that familiar with viewing statistics from your quizzes. And then I will go into a little bit more details, giving you the explicit understandings of each term that's used and what Moodle means by this. So after you've logged into Moodle, go into the specific course where you have a quiz. In this case, I have a quiz assessing your knowledge. This is not as useful as another quiz I will show you. However, it gives you the idea of exactly where you can go to find the information. You cannot view your quiz results until you click on the quiz itself. I'm not referring to how the students did as much as I'm referring to the statistics. Then you go over to the side here and you look under the administration. Your block of administration may be over here on the right side. It may be over here, docked. That depends on what you've done in setting your view up in your office. So when I go to results here, right under preview, it is the sixth item down. Click on results, expand it out, and select. You can go directly just looking at the grades. Responses, what were their answers in averages. We want to work specifically with statistics today. In the statistics, we can see right off that we can see that the course name, number of completed, the number of attempts, etc. So if you give a single attempt, these are going to be the same number. And this is where some of the terminology is not like the coefficient for internal consistency. You may know this term, but what does Moodle mean by that? What kind of numbers are you looking for? Error ratio for the highest grade attempt or highest graded attempt, which if you only give one attempt offer, then this will, well, we'll get to that later. Here are the specific names of my questions. I have a highlighted one that's pink, which tells me that question is one that I should reconsider because of the outcome. And that question happens to also be right here. It's my green bar that goes below, and that's referring to the discriminative efficiency. And then the facility index is the red bars. So I'm going to switch over to another screen of another class that has a better, more completed quiz, one that actually is more applicable to their final grade, whereas I use this merely for the sake of assessing the knowledge of my students prior to the first day of class. So now we're looking at this one. Let's start at the bottom of the page. First, we have our red bars that are the facility index, then our green bars, which is the discriminative efficiency. Facility index otherwise identifies just as a capital F, usually italicized. It's the mean score of students on the item. 5 or less is extremely difficult, and there could be something wrong with the question. So a 5 or less is, and these are your numbers right over here. So we really don't see any red ones that are way down here. And then you have 100, which is identified as extremely easy. 6 to 10 is considered very difficult. 11 to 20 is difficult. 20 to 34 is moderately difficult. However, this is the range you're looking for. 35 to 65 is the about right for the average student based on how other students answered. So if you have a class of 50 students and you're having the majority of them are hitting the if you have a question that hits within the range of 35 to 65, you say, okay, well that was a good question for this class and where they are on the content that's being covered in class. I expand my range and say 30 to 60, which I know that adds a little five on well 65 was the other end. So we have two questions that fall right in that and say they're 70, but they're good enough to say those were right on target for these students. Then we have those that are up here in the 80 to between 80 and 90, and those are between fairly easy as an 80. 81 to 90 is considered easy. Then 90 to 94 is very easy. Then, as I said earlier, 95 to 100 is considered extremely easy. Well, we don't want to go with extremely easy, but we also don't want to make it to where nobody can get it right. Now, that's the facility index. Let's look at the discriminative efficiency. 50 and above is very good discrimination. This is and if you're not sure what that means, the discrimination index is the correlation between the weighted scores on the question and those on the rest of the test. So you want your test to be equal in the sense that it's um, covering the content and testing them on the content across the board where they should be. So that's why it compares question to question. It also it's comparing the results. 30 to 50 is considered adequate discrimination. So very good and adequate. So it would be 30 and above. So we have one that's a 40. So that these three are considered very good. Notice also that when we looked at the facility index, these two were also considered very good. They fell in the right range. So, and these are not hard rules that are just chiseled in concrete. This is it. This is just our baselines to go by. The discriminative efficiency is a statistic to estimate how good the discrimination index is relative to the difficulty of the question. An item which is very easy or very difficult cannot discriminate between the students with different abilities. In other words, you're not really telling students that are ready for this quiz and are read up on the content compared to the students that came to class and were totally unprepared. You want to have a discrimination that shows there's a difference between these two students. Those that are unprepared should not do well. Those that are prepared should do very well. And that's your discrimination you're going for. The efficiency, discrimination efficiency will very rarely approach 100%. What we're seeing here is that we have only one that hits the 100. So as I said, very rarely. The rest of these are way down to 0. What 0 to 19 also suggests it's a very weak at the same time. So we don't want either extreme. We don't want the extremely weak, nor do we want those that are not discriminating at all. So it's weak in the sense that it's not discriminating. So you want a middle ground that's going to be discriminating, which would be like a 30 to 50, something along here, or 50 and above. Yeah, 50 and above was the strongest. 30 to 50 says that it's adequate. So I personally go by the rule of 30 and above because that gives me a higher range of, okay, acceptable. So that's what I call it, acceptable versus adequate. Moodle's terminology is 30 to 49 would be adequate, and a 50 to and above would be very good. Depending on what your department's, what your course is, how strongly you want to show that discrimination. I would hope that you want to show it, in every quiz you give, to give a fairness to all others. Now let's go to the top part here. These are just your questions in between, where you can see the standard deviation. We'll talk about what this number is aiming for, your random guess score, and what it should be, your intended weight, your effective weight, discrimination index. I was talking about these numbers here, and some of them were so low they just didn't show. Your discrimination index. These four questions are fall within the adequate to very good. The rest of them do not. The number of complete graded attempts, 7. There were 7 students, 7 that, and there were 7 attempts. When you have a number as low as 7, it's much more difficult. However, keeping that aside, let's go ahead and look at the average grade of first attempts. Our average grade of first attempts came out to a 94. So they did well. They were either very well prepared for this quiz, or the quiz was too easy. Those two questions are questions you have to answer to yourself. I cannot answer that for you. Let's go to the specific statistics and look at things like the kurtosis, the coefficient of internal consistency, the error ratio, your standard error, and get some specific understandings of what these are. So your average grade for discriminating purposes, tests aim between 50 to 75%. Not saying that that's what your students get, but this is the average. So the students' average was 94. Again, keep in mind there are only 7 students in this class. The less data you have, the less reliable at times. The average grade for all attempts, of course, would be the same number. So let's look at the median grade. Your median grade for the highest is 93. The median grade means that half of the students scored less than this figure. Half of the students graded below 93. Probably about 3 students that graded below a 93, which means the others did very well because your average comes out to 94.25. Then we have your standard deviation. 7.13 is what we have. The standard deviation is a measure of the spread of the scores between the mean, and we want to aim for values that are between 12% and 18%. 12 and 18, again, that goes back to discrimination. 7 is is on the low end. Then we have the score distribution skewness, negative 1.5. The skewness is a measure of the asymmetry of the distribution of scores. 0 implies a perfectly symmetrical distribution. Positive values, or a tail to the right, and a negative values, a tail to the left, coming out with a perfect bell curve, of course. You're most likely not going to get that very often, but the closer you get to 0, the better. So this is a negative 1. we want something that's not below 0. If you start with a decimal only, you're good. Our next one is a score distribution kurtosis for the highest grade attempt. The kurtosis is a measure of the flatness of the distribution. A normal bell shape curve distribution has a kurtosis of 0. Again, we've got 2.7. We've moved quite a distance from 0. So the greater the kurtosis, the more peaked the distribution is. Which means there's not much of a tail on either end. So you want to aim for a value between 0 and 1. A value greater than 1 indicates that the test is not discriminating very well between very good and very poor students. Again, let's keep in mind that the example we're looking at only had 7 students in the class, so it may be. Next item we have is the coefficient of internal consistency for the highest grade attempt. The coefficient of internal consistency, nearly impossible to get much above 90%. Anything above 75 is satisfactory. So 75%, we want satisfactory to good. So 75 to 85 or 89 is good. If the value is below 64, however, the test as a whole, should be considered unsatisfactory, and remedial measures seriously should be taken into considerations. Rewording the quiz, removing some of the questions, you'll see some changes. As a matter of fact, if you remove a question because it was one that everybody got wrong, for instance, your statistics showing in Moodle will also adjust accordingly. So you can go back to the stats afterwards and see, how did this adjust my percentages? Did this improve the test? It also is very valuable for future quizzes, going back and looking at what you've done in the past and saying, okay, for this semester, here's a few things I can make adjustments to that I haven't applied yet. I think the only one I have not answered yet is the error ratio. The error ratio is related to the coefficient of internal consistency. It estimates the percentage of standard deviation, which is due to the chance effects. Often in a quiz, especially multiple choice, as this one is, it can be the student could get it right by chance. So the error ratio takes that into consideration rather than a genuine difference of ability. So values of error ratio in the excess of 50% cannot be regarded as satisfactory. To see the value of your quizzes and how adequately they are measuring your students' abilities. I hope this information has been helpful. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at the Center for Teaching Excellence at either extension 8556, which will be me, and Bethany Sargent at extension 8315.